Want to watch football without the restrictions of blackouts or cable? Check out expressvpn.com to help you get access to all the live games. Sign up today using the link in the description to get 3 free months. Yo, Boat fam, it's the director. Chargers fans, it's been an awesome week, huh? As Chargers fans, getting our beak wet a little bit. OTAs officially kicking off. We're seeing some storylines. We're seeing some narratives unfold. We're seeing the culture be built in the new Jim Harbaugh era. The team's coming together with the veterans and rookies, finding chemistry, finding success, finding weaknesses to attack. It's been pretty interesting. And with it, one thing that you can come to expect every season, starting as early as rookie minicamp, as early as OTAs and even workouts, are camp battles, right? You're going to see a lot of skill come into different positions that's going to challenge players for those starting spots, for those valuable reps, and the Chargers are going to be no strangers to that. There's a ton of different players that have entered the fold from the NFL draft specifically, and free agency that are going to challenge existing players on the roster, as well as just basically finding out what's going to work the best in the new regime of Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman, Jesse Minter. There's a lot of new out there. And when it comes to new, there's a lot of figuring out to do in terms of who fits best here, who's got the best skill set. Sometimes players change positions entirely because they fit a little bit better with a new, Harbaugh way. So today we're going to be going over your camp battles, emerging camp battles in 2024. A very interesting one to follow up on because, there's going to be a lot of versatility, a lot of variety of players that we're going to be looking at today. Now, before we do get started, shout out to the sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Use code DIRECTOR to match your first deposit up to $250. Shout out to the sponsor there. Newcomers, check out the special Anthony Edwards for this weekend. Before we do kick off, hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers content. Small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, bell notification. Helps me out a lot. Let's get into it, baby. Lights, camera, action. Emerging camp battles at Chargers OTAs. Now, you guys know the drill, right? There's several different parts of the offseason. Right now, we're at a pretty good one, right? Kind of the beginning of everybody, right? In OTAs, where you get veterans and you get rookies to come into camp and start looking at what the skill sets look like, what the fit looks like in this scheme, in this system, in this play. And it's all about, I think, surveying the field a little bit if you're a Jim Harbaugh, if you're one of the coordinators. Where do these guys fit? Where's the skill, right? Where's the competition? Who's going to bring the most success? You really study what you've got on the roster. Gives you another last chance opportunity to go out and add talent. By the way, guys, we got a video coming up soon that's going to be pretty important. June 1st is a big date for you guys to keep in that little calendar, right? At that point, you're going to see maybe some roster moves becoming a reality. Post June 1st, roster, cuts or trade designations mean less money is going to be taken from a team if they decide to make that transition or that transaction. So just in layman's terms, you're going to see some veterans pushed out of all NFL teams, which is going to open up opportunity for the Chargers to add more talent to the roster. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we go through the rest of these videos, as the Chargers may not be done adding skill to the team. Now, let's go ahead and kick things off with our first position battle, which I think might shock some people. I think some people definitely would be surprised to see J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards as the first position that we are kicking things off with. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. Running back, all of a sudden, is going to become one of the more important positions on the roster. It has been for the past couple of years. Austin Ekeler was no slouch. He was a big reason why the Chargers were putting up as many points as they were. But that was in a different system, a different offense, right? A lot of underneath passing, a lot of throws underneath to the flat. Justin Herbert was using him more as a safety valve kind of guy. And Austin Ekeler was really good at generating yards after the catch. This offense is going to be a lot different. Right, this offense is going to be more run balance. You're going to see the running backs involved a lot, and that's why the Chargers went out there and grabbed the likes of the Ravens guys, and Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. But what most people probably would assume, which you're correct to assume, is that Gus Edwards is the bona fide number one running back of this team. I would say to start off OTAs and even to start off the season, you would be correct, okay? It's going to be Gus Edwards. However, you take a look at the history of these two guys in Baltimore and what their skill set offers and what, honestly, their synchronicity offers, right? These are two really good running backs that go well together. You got the power guy, you got more of the juice guy. I think both of them are fantastic. But I think the biggest reason why J.K. Dobbins didn't take that leap, because let's remember, J.K. Dobbins is younger than Gus Edwards. The reason he didn't take that leap was because of a checkered past of injury, right? He just hasn't been able to stay on the field very consistently. But when he was, and when Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins were on the field together a lot in Baltimore, it did feel more like a 50-50 thing. And honestly, as somebody who played a lot of fantasy football, it felt like J.K. at times was going to jump Gus Edwards. That Gus Edwards had become the goal line guy, right? The touchdown vulture, we like to call him. And then J.K. Dobbins was kind of like the lightning and the thunder, right? Like he was going out there and putting up the yards and making the plays. It kind of felt like to me, and again, this is as a spectator of the Ravens back then, that J.K. Dobbins was the new hotness, right? Like he was going to be the RB1 of the Ravens by next season. Now, ultimately, injury did derail that narrative for him, and he has not been able to really stay healthy since. This is a new chapter. This is a new circumstance. This is a new environment, a new chance, and a second chance for J.K. Dobbins to maybe try and create that narrative for himself. Again, it all starts with him staying on the field, but I do believe that this is a roster battle. This is a camp battle at the position of running back. This is going to be a very important position, and they're going to go with the hot hand, I think, more often than not, and that could change throughout the course of the season. It could be JK, could be Gus, back and forth. But I think there's going to be a tone set in camp, a tone set in OTAs, and all these opportunities in the offseason for one of these guys to kind of step forward and be the number one. Right now, again, 80% shot to me, it's going to be Gus Edwards. I think he's exactly the archetype that, Greg Roman wants. But J.K. Dobbins has the talent. And again, if he stays on the field, I think he has an opportunity to let that talent shine through once again. Guys, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at Dobbins, highlights through his, few games in Baltimore, which he did get to play I would say a season's worth, right? He did look awesome. He was great. He did look like the new running back one. If he stays on the field for the Chargers more often than not in 2024, who's to say that he couldn't develop into something similar in LA? That's going to be my first camp battle. And keep that in mind, this is a camp battle that I'm sure these guys don't view it that way at all. They see themselves as a pair that's been working together for a long time. They share the load. They have a lot of success together. But I do think it's something that Chargers fans need to keep an eye out for because, hey, man, it could shape what the offense ultimately looks like at RB1, especially for you fantasy football players out there. But at running back, we're not done talking about the position. I think the camp battle that you guys are more interested in seeing in terms of the running back position is going to come through who we just drafted in Kamani Vidal. Okay, Kamani Vidal, new running back out of Troy. This is the new hotness, right? He's going to be going up against, more than likely, Isaiah Spiller. You could convince me of Elijah Dotson, Patterson, maybe even a little bit. No, I think it's going to be these guys. And when you take a look at the running back roster right now, I think it's less about who's going to make the team and who's going to get, any of their reps. It really does feel like, unfortunately, for Isaiah Spiller, it may be a little too late, which sucks because I think all of a sudden the offense looks to be in a shape that Spiller would actually thrive in. Spiller's more of like a patient runner. He's more of a guy that's going to let, space develop in front of him, and he's going to identify that pretty well. Maybe not generate the craziest amount of yards afterwards, but he was pretty consistent in generating solid yards per attempt, right? At this point, though, the Chargers have not had the best offensive line. They've been more of a zone running offense, maybe a little less gap, which I think he's actually finding a lot of success in here. Maybe not the perfect circumstance for him to thrive. Now, with the way that the Chargers have been constructing this offensive line, you got two bookend tackles. You got awesome competition at guard. Center is kind of a wait-and-see position for me as well, but I think it's a little bit more schematically tailored to what Isaiah Spiller would want to do. Unfortunately for him, I think the Chargers went out there and drafted the perfect running back for them in the late rounds. Honestly, even compared up to some of the guys you were going to find in the 3rd and 4th round, Kamani Vidal is really, really special. And I think in terms of what he's going to offer competition-wise, it's going to be very difficult for Isaiah Spiller to overtake that. Now, Spiller does have the veteran edge. He does have, the time with the team. That may be able to push him a little bit forward into the Chargers playing time. But I think Vidal is going to be that guy that climbs the depth chart pretty quickly. I think, honestly, you got 1A, 1B in Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. That's kind of how I'm viewing that partnership at running back right now. And then at running back 2/3, it feels like Vidal, at least right now, with what we're seeing in OTAs, with some of the juice that he's bringing. Honestly, guys, he's compact, yes, but he is powerful. He is fast. He is shifty. He needs to work on his ball carrier vision just a little bit on how he attacks the line. But which honestly, I'll say Spiller does have the edge on him right now. But that can be coached up. His intangibles, his speed, his measurements, they fit exactly what Roman's going to be wanting to accomplish. So this is one that you guys are going to want to pay attention to as well. I'm kind of already starting to see a little bit of evidence that there's going to be a shift there at backup running back. And in all honesty, this could end up, again, knocking on wood, being a pretty important aspect to the team, depth at running back. And this is because Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins have had a history of maybe not staying on the field 100% of the time. I think Vidal was the perfect backup plan there. And if Spiller ends up being a backup to him, he could have a role at some point in terms of touches as well. But another Camp Bell to pay attention to. All right? Next up, a position group that I think is going to see a lot of press this offseason. I think, NFL Network guys are going to be paying attention to this. Chargers fans are going to be paying attention to this. And it's because Jim Harbaugh is now the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. It's going to be offensive line. Now, there's a few positions, or I should say a few players at the position I think you can pay attention to. I think there's some backups out there with Brendan Hymus. You got a bunch of guys in the backup roles, but I think the biggest one that's highlighted for me, at least at what we're seeing in OTAs right now, is definitely Trey Pipkins and Jamari Sawyer. And I think ultimately these guys are both going to be pretty important pieces to the Chargers in 2024, which, funny enough, a lot of us, when we drafted Joe Alt, felt that Trey Pipkins' time on the field was pretty much done outside of a backup role. And lo and behold, Jim Harbaugh had a different idea in the back of his head, right? He was like, what if we took Bikini Bottom and pushed it somewhere else to guard, right? What if we took Trey Pipkins and pushed him the guard? Let's see what happens, right? He's a 72 overall. Jamari Sawyer maybe in the high 60s. Let's see what he looks like at guard, right? Like the whole Madden mentality. And this is something we've already started to see in OTAs, right? We've seen Trey Pipkins at guard. We've seen Joe Alt line up on both sides. We've seen Jamari Sawyer, funny enough, I think one of those guys that maybe is way more versatile than we give him credit for, moving to the outside, moving inside. He's played both sides of the line, at guard and at tackle. It feels like this competition is pretty exciting because, honestly, the way that things work out, Trey Pipkins could be your starting guard and swing tackle. You know what I mean? Or even Jamari Sawyer could end up being your primary backup at right tackle, depending on how things shape up, because honestly, he was a great left tackle when he played in the absence of Rashawn Slater that one season. Maybe he's a great right tackle. You never know. There's just a lot of experimenting going on right now. And I think it's going to entail the Chargers, like Coach Harbaugh said, running out with the 5 best dudes. I think, honestly, Trey Pipkins could end up, 80% shot at this point, being our right guard for the season. And then Jamari Sawyer and Pipkins could end up being premium depth on the roster too, depending on, how the Chargers want to go out there. So it just feels like with the offensive line being such an integral piece to the offense, all of a sudden, they are really, really, really covering their bases in terms of depth, right? And it feels like Sawyer and Pipkins, you could do a lot worse than those two guys battling it out for guard, the starting reps at guard, as well as who's going to be the primary swing. It feels like Sawyer's a great swing guard and Pipkins a great swing tackle, and whoever's starting. But it's kind of an interesting one to pay attention to. All right. Next up, this next position, I got a couple of position battles here. It's going to be probably one of the most interesting to watch for the Chargers in the offseason. This position went from, we have some of the best on the roster, best in the NFL, to all of a sudden we shook things up and now there's some fresh meat on the roster. And that comes by the position of wide receiver. Okay, again, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, the position has looked strong for a while, right? Whether or not they could stay on the field was another situation in itself, but we had the skill group, right? We had the skill at the position. All of a sudden, there's been a big shakeup. Both those guys are gone. Chargers went and drafted 3 wide receivers who are all going to be battling to make the roster, guys. And we also went and signed DJ Chark to the roster too, who I didn't even put on this list. This is going to be maybe the biggest position battle for the Chargers in 2024. Who's going to even make the roster for the Chargers at wide receiver? Because at this point, somebody's out. Somebody's out. And it could be anybody outside of Ladd. Yeah, it could be anybody. Even maybe the freshly signed DJ Chark, you never know. And that's something that is going to draw a lot of attention from the fans because this is a position that a lot of us want to get right. None of us wanted to move on from Keenan Allen. It was a big move. He's one of the best Chargers to ever play the sport. A lot of us have been watching him, even the newer fans for the past several seasons now, and he's been a very beloved player among the Bolt fam. Now we have a fresh look at the position group. Right now, as it were to stand, you probably have Josh Palmer at 1, Ladd McConkey at 2, DJ Chark at 3. Like, there's a lot of guys, but then the depth comes in, right? You still got Quentin Johnston, first round pick from last season. You got Darius Davis, the wonderkind, right? Returner. You've got Brendan Rice and Cornelius Johnson, the 2 late round wide receiver, draftees this season. There's a lot of talent entering the fold all of a sudden, and the battle is not only going to entail who makes the roster, but who's getting some, most of the reps. And that's why I'm going to start things off with this first wide receiver position battle. Josh Palmer versus Ladd McConkey. This to me is going to scream targets, right? Who's going to get more targets in the season? Now, you have the edge with Josh Palmer being the veteran that has been working with Justin Herbert. Herbert's going to be very comfortable throwing to number 5 because, let's be honest, man, Josh Palmer's a great wide receiver. Maybe he's not elite. Maybe he's not even great, but he's really good. He's really, really good. And he has a little bit of that element of Keenan Allen where it's like, yeah, he's not flashy, but he'll get the job done, man. He's more reliable. And I think Justin Herbert maybe views him that way. But with everything that we're hearing out of camp right now, man, even just before coming on and recording this video, I read articles about just how incredible the connection has been between Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey. And you guys know my position on McConkey. Yes, he was my favorite wide receiver, outside of the top 3. And yes, even over like Adonai Mitchell and stuff like that. This was my dude this offseason. I was so elated that we were able to snag him in the second round. But even outside of that bias, McConkey, dude, he's quickly going to be one of those guys that I think Chargers fans recognize as kind of that new Keenan Allen. And again, no disrespect to number 13 at all. But this is the dude that's going to be there. He's going to be available. He's going to be the Justin Herbert favorite, wide receiver. And it's something that I predicted even, when he was drafted. I was like, yeah, I think McConkey's going to end up being wide receiver 1. But it's not something set in stone at this point, right? This is why this is the Camp Battles video. We want to see who's going to be, offering the more upside, but it's quality competition at this point. Josh Palmer's a good wide receiver. Right now, it sounds like McConkey and Herbert have a really good connection, and McConkey's a very good wide receiver. Who's going to step up to that great wide receiver, though, for Justin Herbert to take that number 1 spot and maybe, a bulk of those targets this season? For me, personally, I think it's going to be McConkey as long as he can stay on the field. But Josh Palmer's not going down without a fight, and I do think he stands a pretty good shot at sticking to that number 1 wide receiver position for the Chargers this season, too. That's the first position battle at wide receiver. But the reason I mentioned that there's several is because I also think it comes down to making the roster a little bit. Maybe a little less, on this particular battle. I think it's going to come down to more targets for this one. But you never know. What if this were Cornelius Johnson and Brendan Rice being compared here? One of those guys, might not make the roster. I think at this point, Cornelius is sort of my man out, which is really crazy because we just drafted him. But there's just too many cooks in the kitchen. This camp battle, however, is something that I've noticed in OTAs, right? You've got Quentin Johnston and Brendan Rice. These guys, I think, are going to be competing for some of those, wide receiver 4, maybe even 3 targets that you're going to see throughout the season, which is really crazy to think that all of a sudden we got the 7th round guy in Brendan Rice, going neck and neck with Quentin Johnston, a first-round guy. And it's because OTAs is very telling. It sounds like the Chargers, certainly are not giving up on Quentin Johnston anytime soon. The guy has a lot of talent. They recognize that. Jim Harbaugh, of all people, recognize that. TCU's had, him personally on TCU's had heck of success against the Michigan Wolverines in seasons past. And he does have a lot of things that make him very special. But Brandon Rice is out here, man, with a flame, a fire, a dedication. He's motivated, very, very motivated. And in OTAs, I'm noticing things. I'm noticing Quentin Johnston putting in the work. He's out there on the jugs machine, going crazy, trying to figure out how to get that catching situation under control. And then I do see, clips of him bobbling a catch here and there, which is a little concerning. Then Brandon Rice is out here, and honestly, I don't know how much film he's getting or how much time he's getting in terms of, footage of him at OTAs, but he's been looking pretty clean, man, pretty solid to me. Like, he's looking as solid as you could ask a wide receiver. And again, this is OTAs. Pads aren't on. It's not under the pressure quite yet, but Rice has been looking fantastic. And depending on how things go, the Chargers' confidence could be moved a little bit. Right now, I think it's Quentin Johnston's job to lose. I think he's this team's, at this point, wide receiver 3 or 4, but I do view Brandon Rice as the primary guy that's going to challenge that right now. And Brandon Rice, with what I've seen, could be a threat even to a first-round pick last season in Quentin Johnston. So keep that in mind. Quentin Johnston, Brandon Rice is kind of what I'm noticing. But you guys let me know if you see anything else in camp, too. The other wide receiver position, certainly going to see some competition. DJ Chark and Quentin are going to see some comparison. You're going to see Darius Davis and Ladd a little bit in some situations. They can both be kind of gadget dudes. But these are the two that I think caught my eye the most. I think who's going to get the primary bulk of targets as that available guy, the available wide receiver for Justin Herbert, and who's going to be challenging for targets at wide receiver 4 or 3. It kind of feels like these two guys to me. All right. Won't spend too much time on the next position group, tight end. I haven't seen much. I don't know how much competition there is. All I know is that there's a couple of different roles on the team, right? Hayden Hurst feels like your primary passing down blocking tight end, right? He's going to be the receiver, but he was also not a bad pass blocker as well. Will Dissly feels more like your primary inline blocker at like a run blocking tight end, maybe even on the opposite side. So the only competition I really see right now is who's going to get the bulk of maybe red zone targets. And right now, I think Donald Parham has the edge. He's 6'8". He's got that big frame. He's fast. And Hayden Hurst, who I think is going to be the primary receiving tight end, is going to have a little bit of competition there. But again, won't spend too much time on this because we haven't seen too much in terms of competition. But these are the two guys that would kind of put up against each other, is who's going to get red zone targets, who's maybe going to, Donald Parham is as good as anybody chance to elevate and become a guy that shares a lot of time with Hayden Hurst as a receiving dude, but you never know. All right. Next up, won't spend a lot of time. We're going to enter into the defense. Again, won't spend too much time on this position because this is one that I think has a very specific plan in place for an edge. Okay, so there's some guys out there, like Collins and stuff, that are pushing for a backup role at edge, and I think we may see one of those guys end up making the roster, but edge is pretty oversaturated all of a sudden. Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Tuli Tuipulotu, and now Bud Dupree. And the only reason I'm putting this position group on the camp battles at all is because of how much hype we're hearing around Tuli right now. Guys, have you seen anything on, we're going to cover this a little bit more in depth next week as we recap the first week of OTAs and some of the new stuff next week. Some of the highlights, if I were to highlight two really big things from OTAs, has been Ladd McConkey and Justin Herbert, as well as Tuli Tuipulotu. You can lump in Asante Samuel Jr. as well, but Tuli has been receiving hella praise from Jim Harbaugh and from the coaching staff because he's looked awesome. But I don't know if I really see a competition between him and Bud Dupree. Maybe a little bit in terms of who's the primary, edge 3. But I think everybody's going to be rotating in a pretty healthy amount, right? That's kind of the whole point of having this many good pass rushers on the squad. You want to rotate as much as possible. And you're probably going to see at least 3 of these guys on the field at the same time more often than not. It'll probably be somebody opposite of Morgan Fox. You're going to see Bosa and Mack on the outside, and then maybe at defensive end you see Bud Dupree and Morgan Fox, and then Bud swaps out with Thule, and then maybe sometimes you see one of those primary edge guys in a defensive. Because let's remember, Joey Bosa was definitely not bad at end, right, at times in his career. Same thing with Khalil Mack. Everybody on that line is extremely versatile, and so you're going to see a unique combination of those guys all over the line. So I don't see much of a competition here, but I do wanted to put it on the list because it is something that we hear a lot about right now. Thule has just been looking absolutely fantastic. Let's move on to maybe more of a competition at defensive line. This one's going to be pretty important. Who's rotating in and out of the interior? Right? We know guys like Morgan Fox and those dudes at defensive end are going to see some time. But what about a nose tackle, right? I think the two more likely guys outside behind Poona Ford right now, who I think is the primary nose tackle, is going to be Tito and Christopher Hinton. And Christopher Hinton at times has been pretty good, but I do think he's got a lot of familiarity value right now on the roster. If you guys didn't know, he did play with Coach Harbaugh in Michigan. And he's not been a bad backup for the Chargers for a few seasons now. Tito, on the other hand, has a lot of upside. When he was drafted, I got pretty excited about the idea of him being like a primary backup. You know, a nose tackle kind of run stopping. He's very good run stopping, nose tackle for the Chargers, and one that I think was going to rotate in a lot more had it not been for his health. He's not been able to stay on the field 100% of the time. And if it weren't for that, I think he'd be developed a little bit further into the Chargers, rotating in as the primary number 2 behind Poona Ford. At this point, though, there's a lot to look into here, right? You got the Michigan alum who's going to go in with a little bit more familiarity with Jim Harbaugh, but then you also got, I think, the higher upside guy in Tito, who can come in and play a bit of backup nose tackle for the Chargers. So I think those two are something to keep an eye out for. Haven't seen much in terms of competition yet, but that kind of makes sense to me as the two guys as the primary. What about on the outsides there at defensive end? Because you're going to see a lot of competition of who's playing opposite Morgan Fox and in relief from Morgan Fox. And the two guys I think are going to see a lot of competition are going to be Scott Matlock, who's been kind of a monster. Let's be honest. The dude's been way better than a lot of us have expected. And then brand new draftee and Justin Eboigbe. Eboigbe, I think, has a lot of potential to be a really good rundown defensive end. I think maybe you could play him at nose tackle here and there, but I think primarily he's going to be rotating in the line at defensive end. He's going to look pretty dang good doing that. And Scott Matlock has, I think, been a pretty good pass rusher. So maybe these guys just kind of work hand in hand in terms of, what the down is looking like, who they're going to be needing in terms of specialty. But both of these guys I see as the primary dudes competing for time opposite of Morgan Fox. All right. And I think I like both of them quite a bit. Eboigbe brings in a ton of strength, like freaky strength, if you ask me. He's got some raw power behind him. Needs a lot of refinement as a pass rusher. Now, on the opposite side, I feel like kind of the opposite about Scott Matlock. Like, he's got some great finesse. He's got some great technique. He's got decent power as well. But maybe lacks a little bit in terms of run stopping. It kind of the nice yin yang you're seeing in that pair right there. All right. Next up, a position that I'm not quite sure how to dissect it yet because we haven't seen enough of it yet. OTAs unfortunately started with Junior Colson going down with what we're hearing is a minor injury, but they're just playing it safe with him. What's going on at linebacker? Chargers right now, primarily the top 3 guys are going to be Denzel Perryman, Junior Colson, and Daiyan Henley. Right? I view Denzel Perryman as being that rundown guy. I think he's not bad in coverage either. Like, he's the vet, and I think he's going to see more often than not the reps out there. Between Henley and Colson, though, I think you're going to see a little bit of competition in terms of, like, maybe even with Denzel Perryman, because we're going to see a lot of passing defensive looks out here, and both these guys are pretty good. Again, I didn't quite know how to dissect this, but you're going to see some competition out there in terms of who's playing where. It might, again, come down to who's coming out and passing downs. It would more than likely be Colson and Denzel Perryman for the most part this season. Colson's been a huge narrative of the offseason. He's been an awesome, way ahead of his time or ahead of his years developed player for the Chargers. Like, he feels like, what I'm hearing is it feels like he's a year 3 or 4 player in terms of his development for the Chargers, which is nuts to say because it's his first time with the team, but he understands the system at a level that not a lot of players do. Henley is great in terms of his passing defense. He's a great coverage guy. He's developed quite nicely. I know I've heard some nice things from the coaching staff with him, so don't know how to dissect the linebacker position yet, but there's something brewing there, so keep that in mind. Lastly, last couple of things to mention here. This is probably the biggest competition on the defense that you're going to hear about. Corner. And like wide receiver, it's a position that needed a lot of help in the offseason, right? We had, the absence of Keenan and of Mike Williams kind of filled in with McConkey and some rookies and some free agents. The same thing can be said about corner, right? We don't really have an answer for, I guess, Michael Davis wasn't everybody's favorite, but he was kind of there for a while, right? We've been looking for an opposite cornerback of Asante Samuel for a while. It feels like we went out and got a few guys that could accomplish a few different things. Tariq Still is going to be that slot guy. I almost put him in on this video with him and Jasir Taylor. I think that's going to be a fantastic, camp battle. And it's one that honestly I kind of regret not doing. Keep that in mind. If you guys let me know what you think about Tariq Still and Jasir Taylor. I think Taylor's going to take the slot role, but the outside is what grabs my attention especially. There's two talents out there that I think have some potential. Dean Leonard has been a guy that has been growing on me. He's become a pretty great special teams asset for the team. And honestly, he has the size and speed to contest for outside corner, the guy opposite Asante Samuel. He's big, like 6'1", 6'2". He's pretty freaking fast, and he's developing quite nicely for the Chargers. But on the other hand, you got this guy who I'm extremely high on in Cam Hart, right? Maybe not as fast as Dean Leonard, but he's not slow. He's pretty friggin' big. He's like 6'3". He's got great instincts. He's got, playmaking potential, ball hawking potential. Like, there's a lot to like about Cam Hart. But I think the biggest thing that gets me excited about his potential with the defense is his physicality. The dude is big and mean and physical, and he's not afraid to throw his body around in defense of the run, right? I love that about him. And I think, honestly, this is one of the biggest camp battles I'm seeing right now at OTAs. You're seeing a pretty healthy mix of Cam Hart and Dean Leonard on the outside. And I think both of these guys have a pretty equal shot at picking up that starting position for the Chargers as outside corner. Now, again, we're going to see some cuts. June 1st is a pretty big date in the NFL. We may see another guy come in and take that position for the Chargers, right? We already have a free agent in Christian Fulton, who you can assume is that number one guy. But the reason I'm listing these two guys right now is because I don't see Christian Fulton as the primary answer right now. He could end up being that, but the reason I'm pointing these two guys out specifically is because I think whoever kind of wins the outside battle between these two is going to be the primary challenger of Christian Fulton. And I don't know if Christian Fulton's job is going to be safe at all. I think if, let's say, for instance, Cam Hart wins the battle between these two dudes, I think Cam Hart could overtake Christian Fulton depending on how the season starts and how camp goes. So keep this in mind. This is probably the biggest camp battle, Christian Fulton versus whoever steps up. And then you got guys like Jasir Taylor and Tariq Still, Cam Hart, Dean Leonard. There's a lot to pay attention to here, but I decided to focus in on these two primarily because I think one of these guys could end up being the starting outside guy. Again, I'm not writing off Christian Fulton at all, but I do think the quality of competition is pretty equal to where I see Christian Fulton being in the NFL in his bounce back season this year. Okay. Last but not least, we have safety. Safety. And this is also going to be one of those super, super underrated competitions for the Chargers. You guys hear me talk about this all the time, right? Backup safety could be as important as a starting position on the Chargers because of how much we move that position around. Yes, primarily Derwin James. When Derwin moves, who's playing up top, right? If they don't want to move Derwin off of, high safety, who's playing in the box? A lot of the times the answer there is probably Alohi Gilman, right? He's a pretty good run support safety. Then who's playing in Alohi's spot, right? And then back and forth. I feel like the Chargers need to find a pretty good answer for that. And right now, the two primary guys I see are AJ Finley. I think he was a free agent, right? Either way, he's been not too bad. And then JT Woods, who's been a complete mystery. This is one of the more fascinating camp battles to me because I don't know what the heck JT Woods is even yet. And he was drafted a few years ago. He kind of stunk his rookie season, but I gave him a bit of a pass there. And then last year, he was just gone. We don't know why. He was just inactive week after week after week. I thought he was like injured at first, and then it sounded like he was sick. He just never came back. Don't know what JT Woods is anymore. And again, I think it's really important to pay attention to this position because that's going to be somebody you see on the field a lot more than you think. Backup safety is going to be on this field a lot because of how much we move Derwin and Alohi. And maybe a guy that if they can fit, a box safety role a little bit too, that's kind of exciting. I don't know. JT Woods feels like he's got a nice frame for it. He's big and fast, but I don't know how well he plays in run support. Just got to wait and see how that position group pans out. And then last, I got one bonus camp battle to share with you guys. It's going to be special teams. And you guys might say to yourself, well, director, we got one of the best kickers in the league in Cameron Dicker. We got one of the best punters in the league in J.K. Scott. What could you possibly be talking about? Returner? Darius Davis was awesome last season, right? What in special teams are you referring to? Let me just show you guys the photo. Now, before you all freak out, okay? I want you guys to understand this is something that sparked into my brain, not because I have any lack of confidence in Darius Davis. I think we should stick with Darius Davis. He's been absolutely fantastic. However, the kickoff rules are changing, man. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen this yet. Go on YouTube, look up the new NFL kickoff rules. It's insane, right? It looks like everyone's lining up so closely together, and the defending team doesn't get to start their pursuit until the ball is in the hands of the returner, and it adds a lot more element to that position entirely. Now all of a sudden you want a pretty friggin' good returner because they're not at risk of getting those high momentum, tackles anymore. Like, you see them build up a lot of speed in special teams in year past where they got like 60 yards downfield, they have all the momentum, and then somebody gets punched in the mouth, and it's a very injury prone position because of how much force is behind all that momentum. Now that momentum, unless you've got some of the best acceleration in the NFL, doesn't feel even half as dangerous anymore. And instead the spotlight goes on the returner because that acceleration becomes that much more important. Right? Because you can build up speed and make even more plays as a returner in this particular set than I feel in kick returns of the past, right? Davis was awesome last season, and I do fully expect him to be the returner this year. But it's a conversation we need to have because Ladd McConkey, as a lot of you guys have pointed out, is a returner as well. And he has that skill set. And it might be these two out there as returner buds, in punt and kick returns, whatever. But both these guys are super, like, legitimate threats as returners in the NFL in this new rule system, because both these guys are pretty great in acceleration. Both these guys are pretty great in terms of their after the catch ability. And I would say right now Darius Davis has the edge because he proved it last season in the NFL. But the biggest reason I'm throwing this out there, guys, and I'm going to be blunt with you, is the position group of wide receiver is so oversaturated. Does Darius make the team because of that, and only because of that? I think he does. I don't know if I really want to challenge that too much as a content creator, but it's something I had to float because of just how oversaturated. Like, there's 7 wide receivers right now I think that are going to be challenging to make the roster. Could Darius Davis's job be in jeopardy? I don't think so. I think he's too important to the special teams unit, but I cannot ignore that Ladd McConkey's a great returner as well. And in this new rules, he could be the guy where they're like, yeah, of course we're going to go with Ladd. He's awesome. And the danger of returns are definitely not as bad as before. Definitely not as dangerous as before. We're going to roll with him. So I don't know. You guys in the comment section below, you let me know what you think of that whole thing. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. Hit us up with a like and sub on your way out if you did enjoy this content. And also keep your eye out for more OTAs news. This week's wrapping up. I know there's more coming up here in the next few days. Very important to follow what the Chargers are doing. I think the biggest points of emphasis I can point out to you guys right now, culture seems to be the biggest point of emphasis in terms of what Jim Harbaugh is doing in OTAs. But a couple of narratives to follow that have been very exciting. Ladd McConkey, Junior Colson has been a big one. Asante Samuel, Tuli Tuipulotu, and running back. So just keep those all in mind. But these are the position group battles that I think that I've noticed so far, and there's probably going to be more added in another video a little bit later. We'll catch you guys next time. As always, bolt up and stay frosty. Ladd McConkey, the returner. Kind of crazy to think about, isn't it?